If you've ever found yourself eating something out of stress or sadness, I want you to know that I see you and I've been there. Today, I'm going to share a personal story about how I healed my relationship with food and broke free from emotional eating. If you're new here, my name is Misty, and I've been health and life coach, and I've been coaching women on energy management, regaining their energy, losing weight, and rebuilding confidence since 2015. Several years ago, before I ever started coaching women, I found myself in a really dark place. I was depressed. So I had an in-home daycare center. And after I put all the kids to bed, including my own, and my husband at the time was working, and I would find myself curled up watching my favorite primetime shows and with a bottle of wine or a box of Oreos. I also found myself finishing the box of Oreos or the bottle of wine and hiding the evidence from my husband because I knew he would not be pleased. Now, I have not always had a problem with food. I was not an overweight child or teenager. I had a pretty normal childhood. However, if I think about where this started, I can remember being around 10 or 11 years old and waking up in the middle of the night. And my parents had a downstairs refrigerator. So not the upstairs refrigerator where all the food was kept, but in the downstairs refrigerator, they had like special snacks. They had soda pop, which we were definitely didn't drink on a regular basis, especially the children. And I would find myself sneaking down there, and my mom had this special like red soda pop. I think it was like the sister of Fanta, but it was red. And it was my favorite. I love that. And I would sneak one in the middle of the night when everyone else is sleeping. If you're new to me, you may not know this, but I prefer to understand and get to the root of things. And when I think about what was happening in my life when I was 10 or 11 years old, this was right before my parents went through a divorce. And I grew up in a generation, I think many of you may relate. I think a lot of us grew up in households where it wasn't really normal to express our emotions. Like, I grew up in the 80s. I am right in between the Gen Xers and the early millennials. So I have Pluto and Libra, so I am like a late Gen Xer. However, all my siblings are Pluto and Scorpio. They're all considered millennials. I'm like right on the cusp. And back then in those days, emotions were not something you talked about. And I also grew up with a mother that was very closed off to emotions, that did not show her vulnerable side. She did not show this nurturing side. And so this is how I grew up, hiding my emotions. So going back to my story, when I was putting the kids to bed and getting out my favorite snacks and watching primetime TV alone. By the way, I didn't have these tendencies when my husband was home. And I started to notice a pattern where I was only emotionally eating when I was home alone. Many people who do seek food for comfort or find themselves emotionally eating, we seek food for comfort instead of other sources. Like, food is just, it is a place of comfort. All of our holidays revolve around food, and all of our family traditions and customs revolve around food. So it's natural that we find comfort in certain foods. But when I started to reflect on my own patterns of emotionally eating, and I really did not like that I was hiding the evidence from my then husband. But I found myself in a place where I was giving so much of my own energy to everyone else and rarely pouring back into myself. Like this sliver of time a day after the kids went to bed, I had an hour or 2 hours to myself, and I found myself like coming into my comfort snacks, right? And looking back, when I think about where I was in that point, it's because I was exerting so much of my energy towards everyone else, and I was feeling unbalanced in myself. I was feeling disconnected from myself, who I was, my goals. I actually didn't have any goals, and I was just feeling so depleted. This is like the one sliver of time I had to myself. But there came a time when I decided to prioritize myself, and I wanted to get my confidence back. Now, my marriage was kind of in a rocky place, and I found myself mentally unstable, emotionally unstable, physically, I didn't like my body, and I was very financially unstable and relying so much on my then husband. And I knew I had to get myself on a place of like solid ground to where I become unshakable to any of my circumstances around me. So, how I healed my relationship to food, and I hope this serves you, and I hope that this can help you in some way. I took my focus off of everyone else and brought it back into myself. I started journaling. I wrote forgiveness letters, not only to other people, but I wrote a forgiveness letter to myself. And I realized I was carrying so much resentment towards other people who made me feel abandoned, who maybe wasn't treating me the way I needed to be treated. And I wrote forgiveness letters to them, and I didn't ever give it to them, but this was just a way to heal my own heart. And I started prioritizing my own health. I started prioritizing what it was I wanted, and I started setting goals. And when I started prioritizing myself by working out and eating right, I ended up becoming the happiest and healthiest person I had ever been before. All of a sudden, because I was eating right, I was eating a balanced diet, I was getting enough protein, and I was no longer deficient in certain nutrients, my sugar cravings like nearly just went away. But more importantly, because I almost like became my own best friend and I started giving and pouring into myself in ways that maybe I never poured into myself ever, I no longer was seeking comfort in food. So journaling is still part of my daily practice, or I try for it to be. Sometimes life gets in the way and children get in the way. However, I always come back to journaling because this is what I found the best way to process my emotions. And I am an overall healthier human being when I have a journaling practice, because it is also a way to reconnect to myself. Moving my body and eating a balanced diet are non-negotiables for me. I recognize when I'm not moving my body and I end up storing up all this energy. Another piece of this that I like to talk about, because there's such an unhealthy obsession with food, and anytime I would try and go on a diet and I would restrict myself from a particular food, it became such an obsession. That's all I wanted. So I no longer have good foods and bad foods, and I'm very mindful because I have children. I also don't want them to ever feel guilty about what food they're eating and what food they're not eating. We do have discussions about what foods are better, but we don't have any foods that are like off limits. And if you have an unhealthy relationship with food, a lot of times, especially after like a binge, you might feel guilty and shameful around what you just ate or what you just had or how much of it you had. To recap, for me, when I go find myself back in a place of stress eating or emotionally eating, I know it's because I'm feeling neglected in some point, in some way, and I need to pour back into myself. And I need to become my healthiest, my happiest, because that is my source and that is my pattern of emotional eating when I am feeling neglected. And I keep my emotional eating in check when, one, I'm pouring into myself. First, I put myself at the top of my to-do list and ask myself every day what it is that I need. I'm eating a balanced nutrition. I'm eating regularly every 3 to 4 hours. I have eating enough protein, an adequate amount of fat, and that is what keeps my sugar cravings away. And I'm also moving my body in a way that feels good to me, not in a way of like abusing my body or trying to work off the calories. That's not why I work out. I work out because it makes me feel good and it gives me energy. And I actually feel my absolute best when I'm working out at least 4 to 5 days a week. I'm moving my body in some way, in some capacity. So I would love to hear from you. Have you ever found yourself in a place of eating stress or from sadness? And what is your relationship with food trying to teach you? What can you learn from this? And have you noticed the pattern of when you emotionally eat and versus when you have no desire to emotionally eat? If you would love to learn more, I would love to talk about this more. If you have any questions around emotionally eating, leave me a comment below. And also, I do have a free guide all about the energy blueprint, and it's all about the things you can do to get your energy and your confidence back.